with this discussion, because you took the time to write like quite long, comprehensive responses to my Instagram post, do you just kind of want to go through them and then we can just discuss it and see where we agree and where we disagree? Or we can go through my post first and then see what your response was and then just talk about it, or what would you prefer?
I reckon, should we go through your post and then, because I can just, like there's maybe no point us reading my response because I'm here, so I can just say it verbally.
Yeah, okay. Sure, all right.
So yeah, I reckon if we go through yours and then. Yeah.
Okay, so the misunderstanding I thought was, hang on, let me just get the post up. A lot of your refutes to the original post sort of were characterized as I was coming at it from a pronatal position. So just a reminder that when we do this discussion, my argument for this is for people to be agnostic. I think that's the most reasonable thing with antinatalism. So just like a reminder, when we do talk about it, you're refuting a agnostic position, yeah, not a, like I'm not a pronatalist. Yeah, I could be, but as we talk now, I'm agnostic on antinatalism, and that the post that I did was showing arguments and the position for being agnostic on antinatalism.
Can I quickly ask you a clarifying question? What does agnosticism look like on this topic?
When you say look like, as in what is?
What is the substance of it? Because like as far as I could tell, if you're agnostic on the situation, you wouldn't procreate, and so agnosticism kind of leads to the same practical outcome as being against procreation.
I mean, to me, agnostic is just you're uncertain, so people can just do whatever they prefer, because there's no, like, for me, there isn't a sound argument for pronatalism or antinatalism. So to me, it doesn't really matter what people do at this stage. So I see no reason why they shouldn't just do what their preferences say in the absence of a strong argument for either case. So me, no, because I'm never going to procreate. I never want kids. Like I'm just, no. Me not having kids is not me being an antinatalist, just because my actions might show that my actions might be antinatalist because I'm not having kids in that essence. But I don't think that's a reflection of what I actually think on this. So does that kind of make sense or not?
No, I totally get you. So basically, like if someone looked at you and your actions, you would basically have the same actions as an antinatalist, but the reasons, or maybe the lack of reasons, are different. That's basically, so like. Yeah.
So basically it's just uncertain, and whatever people are doing now, I don't have a moral judgment on until like I'm convinced either way, which I don't know if I'll ever be, because my position is I don't understand how people are coming to the conclusions they're coming to on either side, just because it's such an abstract philosophy. Yeah. So if I were to argue with a pronatalist as well, I would still probably be saying the same things, which is kind of ironic because, you know, they're coming at it from completely separate, like different ends of the spectrum. But yeah, the uncertainty thing is a big one for me. And that was the argument I was most convinced on. So yeah, you said,
I was just going to say, just because I don't know if we wanted to get hung up on this bit about agnosticism before, but the one thing I just wanted to say is I feel like there's somewhat of a, there's like an unequal weighting. So if you're agnostic, I would say your position should still be that people shouldn't procreate, because if you're agnostic, you actually don't know if it's okay to procreate yet. And so if someone does, that is at best reckless. Whereas if you are agnostic and you don't procreate, well, no one is potentially getting hurt. Do you get what I mean? Like if you're agnostic, you should err on the side of caution anyway. And erring on the side of caution is non-procreation because you're not involving.
But erring on the side of caution, you've already taken an antinatalist position. That's not agnostic, because you've already taken the view that creating sentient life is bad. So you wouldn't be agnostic, you would still be a soft antinatalist or something like that. Whereas my position is complete uncertainty. I think this is such an abstract, broad topic. So for me to say, oh, we don't know, are on the side of caution, I've already taken a somehow like backdrop that antinatalism is the correct philosophy. For me, it's just, I have no idea, do what you want until we have a more solid like argument for pronatalism or antinatalism.
But do you not think if we're uncertain on the topic, it shouldn't be the case that you should do what you want. It should actually be don't do anything yet until you're sure.
Not necessarily. I mean, unless there is slight
Like,
evidence on either side that someone, that some huge, like an overwhelming cause of harm is going to happen, then I wouldn't take a side. But in most cases where people create sentient life, it's not that clear what kind of outcome is going to happen. And antinatalism is the view that no one should create sentient life, ever. So I wouldn't be willing to say that for every single situation, or have that as a baseline philosophy. Because in my opinion, it's way too broad and too abstract. Like, it's just making claims on things that we just don't know. You know what I mean? I don't understand why people feel compelled to have such a strong position either way.
Yeah, I would say, because maybe the first slide we go through is like the definition you gave, but I would say antinatalism isn't necessarily the opposition to the creation of any sentient life. I would say there's the occasional slight caveat. So the classic one is like, if you create a sentient being that is literally incapable of experiencing suffering or anything that they wouldn't want. So, if they have a life of pure bliss, which is obviously, like, in reality, that's never actually practically going to be possible, probably anyway. Then I would say what I would be, and I would say most antinatalists would probably be just agnostic on that. Or not agnostic, but just indifferent. Like, you create them, you don't create them, it doesn't really matter either way. Like, if they get created, they're going to have this blissful life, like nothing bad is going to come to them. But if you don't create them, like, well, they never existed anyway, so they're not going to miss it. So I wouldn't say it's like the total opposition to any creation of sentient life, but in reality, it does.
We have
come
that
out
caveat, and then we can ask the question, what about 99% well-being, 1% suffering? And then most people would be like, oh yeah, okay, maybe that's okay too. And then it's like, what about 98%? What about 90%? What about 80%? So obviously there's a threshold somewhere. And that's one of the things I think it's reasonable to be uncertain on. And it also leads you to a place of agnosticism, in my opinion, even when we're talking about this caveat that antinatalism has, because it is so, I don't know if subjective is the right word, but there is some kind of threshold that even antinatalists apparently seem to have, where if there is a certain amount of well-being met, then the creation of sentient life is okay. So it still leads you to this position where, okay, I'm not sure then, because I don't know what sort of life you're going to have if we're going down that kind of branch of argument that you just brought up. So yeah, a world with complete perfect well-being, that's never going to happen, but maybe slight suffering, that might be okay as well. And then you just get into these gray areas. So it's still very unclear to me whether antinatalism or pronatalism is a thing.
I mean, different antinatalists will answer differently. So, like, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I would say in the case of like 99% and 1%, I would say, yeah, there's literally no reason to bring them into existence. They're not going to miss anything if you don't. Like, they just literally don't exist. They don't exist on any level. So I'd say just don't bring them into existence in that example.
See, I just wouldn't be willing to make that call. Like, just infinite amounts of 99% of like just amazing like orgasms and like amazing wonderful experiences.
Yeah, but they don't want it. They literally don't want it. They don't exist on any level. There's not some sort of like nether region of fetus like ghosts trying to get into existence, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. See, again, it will just come back down to we don't have a mechanism for actually like objectively measuring that, whether non-existence would be preferable to 99% well-being, 1% suffering. To me, if we did have, like when Sam Harris talks about his objective morality, he predicts that in the future there will be more accurate ways to measure well-being and suffering and happiness through neuroscience. So when people ask for like a practical example of what that objective measurement might look like, because they say, oh, you talk a lot about this objective measurement, but you never like offer an example of that. That's usually the one I could probably give. And I just think based on like my basic knowledge of science, it would be difficult to say that non-existence is preferable, or whatever the word is more justified than a world where sentient minds are experiencing 99% well-being, 1% happiness. But if that's where your threshold is at the 1% point, it might just be an axiomatic difference in our view on life and suffering and happiness.
Well, we're on the topic of your first one, the principle of uncertainty. So should we just go through, should we quickly, just so it's I don't know if the word is formalized, but should we just read through your post so it says exactly what you said, and then I can
Yeah. So do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
No, you go for it, and then I can do my one.
Okay, so I've changed from being someone who supported antinatalism to being agnostic on the philosophy. No time to do a video, but we're doing a video now, so here it is. The following are the main principles. So the first one is the principle of uncertainty. There is no data that shows whether most sentient life would prefer existence to non-existence or vice versa. There is also no data or current mechanism, doesn't necessarily have to be empirical data, just any kind of concept almost, either way empirical or, what's the other one that isn't conceptual, to measure the overall quality of life in the world has to indicate whether existing is better than non-existing. In the absence of data or mechanism, the principle of uncertainty applies and generally leads one to being agnostic on the issue.
Cool. So I will just go over what I said in my response. So I basically said that I feel like your critique, and maybe I'm wrong on this, so we'll get into it, but I felt like your critique was sort of aiming at the wrong thing. So when you said there's no data that shows whether most sentient life would prefer to exist or prefer existence or non-existence or vice versa, it kind of bases it on some empirical certainty, but then you said as well some sort of conceptual mechanism as well.
Any unit of measurement.
Yeah. So basically my response was that I feel like the position on the table isn't one where you really need to measure anything, and so it doesn't really make that much sense to launch a critique that is based on the measurement of something. So let's say, for example, you were able to measure pain and pleasure in some sort of at least vaguely accurate way. If not, we come up with some sort of way to like very accurately measure it. You basically have two general possibilities, apart from the middle one where it's like you have exactly balanced, you know, pain and pleasure or good or bad or whatever you want to call them, but like that's probably very unlikely. So you find that like most sentient life have like, you know, net positive life, or, you know, if you're able to ask them, they say, yeah, I've enjoyed my life. I would say this isn't a reason to bring them into existence, because when they're in the state of non-existence originally, they don't want any of this good stuff. They have no interest in having it. They have no need for it. It doesn't matter to them. And so if you don't give it to them, then they're not deprived in any way. Then on the other hand, you could also find that most sentient life or all sentient life or whatever have like a net negative life, or, you know, they have a life that when you ask them if you can, they say, no, I'd prefer not to have lived this. I would say that is a reason not to bring them into existence, because even if in the state of non-existence, they don't have any interests at that point, if you're comparing the two scenarios, you know that they're going to be better off in non-existence. And so if you have this empirical or other way of measuring things, you get to the same conclusion as just being able to do it in your head in the abstract. And so it doesn't really it doesn't really make sense to me to make some sort of critique based on measurement, because I just don't see why, if you do all these measurements, it seems like you're just going to get to the same conclusion, that with the individual who you're creating in the limelight, they don't really have anything to gain, but they do have a lot to lose. And so from my perspective, like the principle of uncertainty, like the uncertainty of the quality of life you're creating, is an argument for not bringing new life into existence, because you're uncertain about what the quality is going to be. And so, yeah, I just don't see how any sort of like empirical or mechanistic, if that's a word, uncertainty is an argument against antinatalism. If anything, it's either not an argument against it or an argument for it. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like, it's less about empirics, although one day empirical data might be involved, but it's more, yeah, I guess the mechanistic, conceptual way to determine whether sentience or not is justified. I would agree with you on the second one about if it's guaranteed you know, I don't think really poor, like people without resources and it's guaranteed that kid is going to suffer terribly should have kids. But to me, that's not antinatalism. Antinatalism is all sentient, bringing all sentient life into the world is bad. And so is your, just clarifying your position, is your position that because they are likely to suffer, because they will suffer at some point, there's no reason to bring them into the world?
So you mean anyone, like even someone in a very like affluent area?
Yeah, I just mean, because you have that very, the only way you would agree with bringing sentient life into the world is if they could experience a perfect life with no suffering whatsoever.
Yeah, so when I'm making this like judgment in my head, I'm thinking about the individual being that's going to be created. And so I feel like they literally have no interests in coming into existence. They don't want it, they don't need it, all of this sort of stuff. And if you do bring them into existence, you're going to cause them harm in some way. And so I just don't see why you would, and why it would be justifiable with respect to the one that you're creating. I feel like a lot of people say, if you know you're raised in an affluent area or something like that, I feel like a lot of people will then try to justify it by saying, oh, well, you know, they've had this net positive life, or look at all these good things. But it's like they're trying to justify all of the bad things that they've inflicted on someone by creating them, by appealing to positive things that that person didn't even want in the first place. So it makes no sense to me to try and justify bad things you've inflicted on someone with these other things that they didn't actually want, they never asked for, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I understand that position, but it's still highly subjective in that I guess your position values suffering so much and it doesn't place much value on well-being. And I think that is unreasonable. So it's still
Well, can
not.
I make a...
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I agree with you, but only from the standpoint of someone who doesn't exist already. If someone exists like me and you, like obviously I put loads of value on well-being, because I want, now that we exist, I want us to both have as good a life as possible. But when someone doesn't exist, it kind of seems to me like the only thing you really need to consider is whether they are going to come into harm's way when you create them. Because I mean, whether they're going to win the lottery or become a doctor and have like a really high income or meet the love of their life, like, I don't know, none of those things really matter, because it's like they don't exist, like they don't want any of that stuff. But it would be a really bad thing to do to create them and all these evils happen to them, like cancer ravaging their body, or, you know, something like that.
I mean, like, I just don't think it's an argument for antinatalism, because it's just placing this huge value on suffering and then excluding these other things that beings can experience. And to say we don't know what they would want, like, you don't know because they don't exist. Like, I still don't understand how we would even measure that, because they don't exist yet. It's like, it's still having a very strong stance on something that we can't measure, but you've obviously applied some kind of like measurement to it, like based on your values, which I understand, but I guess I just disagree in its accuracy and how universally it could be applied. Yeah.
You know how you were saying like we don't know what others would want, because, you know, we're making a judgment on the situation from sort of like our perspective, and we don't really necessarily know what the preferences would be of the being that may be created.
It's not really a preference. It's just more whether sentience is justified. That's the question I think we cannot answer without arbitrarily prescribing, you know, our own values to it, which I think is really like not a good way to do it, just because, oh, I'm one person, I think suffering is bad, therefore antinatalism. You know what I mean? I think there are so many other possible ways to measure whether sentience can be justified. I'm not sure of those ways yet, but just on that baseline, I wouldn't be confident in having an antinatalist worldview.
What do you mean by sentience being justified? Do you mean it in and of itself, or do you mean like the creation of it by someone else?
Yeah, the creation of it, whether that can be justified or not. That's why I'm in that agnostic position, because yeah, there's all this harm that could potentially happen, but then there's also well-being. So my position considers both. like well-being and like happiness and all these like wonderful things as well as suffering. And I don't agree with people who say, no, it's not justified because definitely it's going to cause harm. And I don't really agree with people who say, oh, no, don't worry. Like, they're going to experience all this happiness and blah, 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 because of that unit of measurement that I need to come to a like certain place where you are and where pronatalists are. Yeah.
I was going to say something else, but I've completely forgotten it. So I'll go with this thought that I was just thinking. In terms of like sentience being justified, oh, this was the thing I was going to say. I just wanted to clarify for, you know, I'm pretty sure you already would understand this clarification, but just for anyone who ends up watching this, the reason that I asked about what you meant by sentience being justified is I wanted to make sure the distinction was understood between sentience itself and one person creating another sentient life. So, for example, if you use the example of like the extinction of humans as a species, I'm not necessarily pro-extinction. I'm just anti-procreation. Now, people not procreating will, you know, just naturally lead to extinction, but extinction isn't really the goal per se. And I'll give an example. Let's say we all stop procreating overnight, right? No new beings are born into existence, but somehow like all of the humans already in existence gain immortality. Is it immortality when you live forever?
Immortality, yeah.
Yeah. Let's say they gain immortality. Well, I would not say that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, as long as they had a way to opt out, you know, like euthanasia or something like that. Like, I don't want someone to be trapped in existence forever if they don't want it. So this is an example I mean, is that if these people are already in existence and they can live forever and it's up to them, well, that's fine. You know, they have their own life. They're going to make their own choices. That's up to them. So I'm not necessarily pro-extinction. It's just like, no one is immortal, and so extinction would naturally come from the position I hold, if you get what I mean.
So the ultimate goal, because as I understood it, the human extinction was or is a goal of a lot of antinatalists that I've spoken to. But obviously there are subcategories and there's differences among people who identify as antinatalists. So for you, is it a reduction in population? Like, what is the ultimate goal for antinatalism for you?
Well, the ultimate goal is just for no one to create any new life. Now, like, obviously in the situation we're in now, that would lead to just no one existing. But let's say in the future, you know, because the human population isn't just going to go away now. So we are going to be around for some time, regardless of what I think. So let's say, you know, 1,000 years down the line or something, we're able to come up with some technology where you can give someone an injection and they can live forever. It's not like I would go around and campaign for people not to get that injection. Like, it's up to them. If they want to do that, that's fine. So no, I would not say I'm necessarily pro-extinction. My goal is just to, you know, go around, try and influence people so that they will make the decision not to procreate themselves. I'm not going to force anyone to do anything. I'm not going to.
But what is the argument for that if the goal isn't human extinction? Like, why? Like, what is the argument for antinatalism? Like, if you could say it in a couple of words, like a couple of sentences, because this is something someone asked me when I was anti-natalist and actually couldn't provide a proper answer because I didn't have to, because I'm like, it's not human extinction, it's not this. Like, so what is the argument for antinatalism?
So just so I sort of what's the word, define the framing or whatever. So when I think about it, I'm not thinking on some sort of like large population scale stuff like this. I'm thinking about the individual that's going to be created, right? But obviously that then, once you've made a sort of judgment call on that, it sort of scales up to, right, well, that would apply to everyone else, and so it would apply to a population and stuff like that. So when you're thinking, I mean, to be honest, there's loads of different arguments, so I probably won't get through all of them now. But when you're thinking about bringing someone into existence, there's many different things you've got to take into account. So they can be broken down into basically two main categories, and they're usually called like misanthropic and philanthropic, right? So the philanthropic ones concern the individual that's being created, and the misanthropic ones concern, if the being is created, what impact would that have externally, like on the world and the beings around them, right? So the philanthropic ones, the main ones are like the axiological asymmetry. So that's basically comparing the, non-existent with the existent. So you're saying, if you don't exist or you exist and have a good life, or if you compare those two things, it's like, yeah, if you exist and have a good life, that's good, but it's not a reason to bring you into existence because you never wanted to come into existence anyway. And then you compare non-existence and existence where you've had a really shit life. And it's like, if you come into existence and have a really shit life, well, that is really bad. So actually, we should avoid that. Even if you don't have any interest to avoid pain in non-existence, we know that it would be so shit here. That is a reason not to do that to you, right? So that's the axiological asymmetry. Another one is the consent argument. So it's basically like, it's literally impossible to get consent from someone to bring them into existence, because they don't exist on any level. And when you do bring them into existence, you put them in the way of great harm and all of these things. And so the best thing to do in terms of consent is, just err on the side of caution and don't bring them into existence. Another one is the risk argument. So even if you're of the position where it is a good thing to bring someone into existence if they have a good life, even if you throw away the axiological asymmetry, you still have the risk argument, which is basically it's basically the principle of uncertainty is the argument. This is the argument for antinatalism. The principle of uncertainty is like, you have no real way of being able to judge what the person you're creating's life is going to be like when they're alive. You may be able to mitigate some, suffering that may come to them by accumulating wealth and stuff like this, but you have no guarantee of being able to ensure they have a really good life. And you're putting them at risk of having a horrible life potentially, whereas in the other scenario of them not existing, there's literally no risk to them at all. They don't exist. So that's another example. Another argument, a fourth one, I think it's the fourth one I want, is argument for imposition. So it's basically, life is essentially a series of needs that you have to satisfy and go around. And, if you don't eat, you're going to be hungry and die. If you don't drink, you're going to be thirsty and die. If you don't go around and seek entertainment, you're going to be bored and sort of malnourished in a sort of, not in a nutritional way, but malnourished in sort of like your experiences or whatever. And all of these things, when you create someone, you impose all of those things on them, and then they spend their life having to go around and try and cater for all those needs that they didn't ask for. And there's others as well, but like those are like four ones.
Okay, so the first one, the individualistic, the individual will suffer, so therefore don't bring them into life because they didn't agree to it or whatever. We sort of covered that already, and I think we established where our differences are in terms of like an understanding of whether we can justify bringing sentient life into the world or not. So I won't really get into that because your position is they're going to suffer. The best thing to do is not to bring anyone to life, and my position is I don't think we can make that judgment yet because of the lack of mechanistics, or because I just don't find it a conceptually sound argument. Is just too abstract. The second one of consent.
I was just going to say one thing I just wanted to say before we move on that is I kind of wanted to push on that point because I feel like that point, even of agnosticism, still compels you not to bring someone into existence, because if you're agnostic on something, you shouldn't be doing a positive action, and creating someone is a positive action, whereas not creating someone isn't. Like, it's not a
I think necessarily action. Like, I think you're being a bit like motivated reasoning on this, because for example, okay, just say a man is selling ice cream, and if you ate the ice cream, you could get a cold, but you could also rarely love it. The principle, if you applied the principle of uncertainty here, I wouldn't stop anyone from getting that ice cream, and I wouldn't not get the, like, it would just be, people are free to, it's like a free will kind of thing. Like, people are free to act how they please. Because by saying don't do it, you've already taken a position. That's not agnosticism.
I understand that example, but with the example of the ice cream is, if you're going into that situation with the ice cream and you don't know whether you're going to enjoy it or not, you're the one that the repercussions are going to happen to. So you're making a decision for yourself. Whereas procreation, like, yeah, there will be repercussions for you because you'll have to look after the child and stuff like that. But you're not the only one who there's a repercussion for, if you get what I mean. So I don't feel like.
But why does that matter? It still leaves you in an agnostic position. the child could have the best life ever, or it could have the worst. Like, that's not an argument for antinatalism. Like, if you can make a parallel argument, then to me, it's not a structurally sound argument. I mean, a structurally sound argument, according to the study of argumentation and logic, is that, you know, it can't really be refuted and the conclusion flows from the premises. But this is like, someone can just come in and say, oh, but the child could have the best life ever. So you're still in an agnostic position.
Yeah, but if you're agnostic, what I'm saying is if you don't know which one is true, that the child could have a good life or the child could have a bad life, the agnostic position would make you, okay, well, if I don't know, I'm just not going to do anything.
Okay. Here's what we disagree on. We disagree on whether the principle of uncertainty entails an action or a non-action. To me, it doesn't entail anything, and people just are free to do as they please, because not taking a side or taking a side is still, that's not an agnostic position. You're still essentially arguing for antinatalism based on this belief that you have that it's going to cause them harm, and that's greater than the well-being. Whereas I'm not in that position where I'm going to say, oh, the harm is so great that any kind of harm doesn't justify sentience. Do you see the difference?
No, I understand the difference that you're putting forward, but what I was saying is if you're uncertain as to what the quality of life of the person you're creating is actually going to be, you don't know if it's going to end up being like the negative is going to end up being outweighed by the positive. And so I would say if you're uncertain about it, you should not be putting someone in a situation where you're uncertain what that's going to do to them, which is what I'm saying. So like
but that's not antinatalism.
Sorry?
That's not antinatalism. That's just don't breathe if you're going to have a net negative life. Like that's a different argument.
Sorry, say that again. I think there was a delay, so I spoke.
Like if you're saying to me, or your position is don't have kids don't bring sentient life into the world if you can't guarantee them and a net positive life. To me, that's not antinatalism, because antinatalism takes the view that bringing all sentient life into the world is bad. Or should it be done?
No. What I was explaining before was what I thought the agnostic position would be. Like, so the agnostic position, when you're thinking about it in your head, is different from the antinatalist position. But what I'm saying is I think the practical actions that would follow from that end up being the same between the antinatalist and the agnostic. But if you're pro-natalist, the action would be different, is what I'm saying. I mean,
it really depends. I could be agnostic on this and then one day have a kid, but still be agnostic philosophically on antinatalism. Like I'm still not sure if I've done the right thing or not, but I could still have a kid. I don't think the actions reflect like the philosophy that you hold to be true.
I would say, sure, you could be agnostic on it and then you would have a kid, but I would say that your agnosticism would in no way justify having the kid. I would still say having the kid would be unjustified because you were uncertain as to whether it was okay to do that or not.
See, I would disagree because you can't prove it either way. Like I can't prove whether it was justified or not. So it's just me living my life, basically.
You can't prove it either way. And so if you're going to do something to someone else where you can't prove either way whether it's going to be good or bad, I would say you should err on the side of caution and not do anything.
That's erring on the side of caution. That's not the uncertainty principle. The uncertainty principle is simply no data. That's it. Like you're not really taking a position, or whatever you do is not a reflection on what the statement you hold to be true. That's how I saw the uncertainty principle. But we're probably getting a little bit too deep into the uncertainty principle, but that's how I understand it. Has you can hold a statement to be true, but your reflections don't, like your actions don't reflect on those values because you're uncertain. So you don't have to place a moral value on your actions in the absence of data.
Yeah, we can leave it for people watching to.
Yeah, they can discuss it. But yeah, for you, just to clarify, your interpretation of the uncertainty principle leads someone when regarding antinatalism to err on the side of caution and not bring sentient life into the world. To me, that's already taking an antinatalist position. And the way I interpreted the uncertainty principle is that in the absence of data, you are agnostic and none of your actions or inactions reflect on that statement, because you're simply just saying, I'm uncertain. So you're not placing any value judgments or moral judgments on the actions, whether they're pronatal or antinatal.
Well, I would respond, but I don't want to go down like a thing. So we can just go to
Yeah, it's all right. I
the
think I know where you're coming from. You know where I'm coming from. It's okay. Maybe
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah.
mathematician or something can like go into the origins of the principle of uncertainty and say which one is more accurate. Okay.
But what that whole conversation came from something that we were talking about.
All
I
right. Yeah.
asked.
Okay. So you've listed the reasons for antinatalism, like the arguments. The next one was consent. So with this consent
Oh,
issue, yeah. So no one can consent into coming into the world. I don't think this is a valid or a legitimate argument because I think we have a very idealized view of consent where it's two consenting informed adults. And in an ideal situation or in common situations, that is what consent is. But then you have situations where you have to give a kid medication or something like that, or you can save someone's life, but they don't know you're saving their life. So there's these situations where consent is not required. So I don't think, and with the bringing sentient life into the world, again, I just think it's too, I'm agnostic because I don't think there is a good reason either way, because I don't have those same values as you when it comes to suffering and well-being. So the consent issue is not, for me, it's not a valid argument because you can just say, you know, if you come at it from my position where I don't value suffering that much, like I don't, like it's not, if someone's suffering, you know, 20% and having an 80% good life, I would be fine with that. So yeah, I don't see consent as a.
Fine with that?
Hmm?
How do you know they would be fine for that? With that,
Well,
do
you
you
don't
get to
know.
know?
You don't know. That's why I'm agnostic.
So yeah, but
Like,
if you don't know, should you be creating them?
I'm agnostic on this. Like, we're just getting back to the uncertainty principle. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah. Okay, cool.
you
Well,
know, we
I
don't
would
know.
say no. If you don't know, you shouldn't create them. But we can go back
Yeah.
to the example of the injection. So I would say with consent, once someone exists, there are many valid reasons to, you know, sort of go round consent or something like this. Like if you're a kid, you know, or if you're an adult and you have a child and, you know, you need to violate their consent in some way because you know it would be in their best interests because they may not fully understand the situation or something like this. And you gave the example of injecting them with whatever, something. I would agree with that. So once people exist, I think, you know, reality doesn't exist to be convenient to us. We have to navigate all these moral issues and stuff like this. And sometimes that involves violating someone's consent, and that's perfectly fine. Like just to make sure for anyone watching, there are many reasons that you wouldn't violate someone's consent in other, like I'm not just saying consent is nothing. But when it concerns someone who isn't in existence and you're bringing them into existence, I would say if you're bringing them into existence, so when someone is already in existence, they've got to navigate all these things and there's trade-offs. Whereas if someone isn't in existence, there's not really a trade-off. Like they're just in, well, they're not in anything. They don't exist in any way. There's no risk of harm coming to them or anything like this. Whereas if you are, without being able to ask them or get consent from them, bringing them into existence and putting them at risk of great harm or any harm without asking them and without them saying that it's okay to do so, I would say that's not justifiable because it's not, I don't think it's comparable to the examples where someone already does exist, like injecting them, because then you're doing something that will be in their better interests. But if someone doesn't exist, they have no interests. So you can't really say I'm violating their consent for their own sake. It doesn't make sense. Do you get what I mean?
It's unethical to bring them into existence because they're going to suffer. But I could just make the parallel argument, like there could be an amazing person that helps many people and saves many lives. Like it's still not a structurally sound argument for antinatalism for me. You know, that you don't know what sort of life they're going to have. It's still uncertain, and it still doesn't convince me out of agnosticism because again, it's just too abstract. Yeah, a lot of these arguments are just going to boil down to me being like, we don't have a mechanism for that, or we don't have data for that, and yeah, I just find it unpersuasive to say don't always bring sentient life into the world because of this reason or because they can't consent because of the conceptual issues relating to consent that I just discussed. I don't think it has to be this informed adults always and everyone is on the same page. It could be justified by your kid growing up and like helping a lot of people and making a huge difference into the world. But then I also understand how if they have a really bad life, then it probably wouldn't be justified. But it doesn't lead me to a place where I'm not agnostic because of those parallel arguments. Because I see a lot of these arguments for antinatalism as being eliciting parallel arguments from the other side. And once I identify a parallel argument, something I learned from Isaac, actually, from Ask Yourself, it's not a structurally sound argument. Like it doesn't lead me to a conclusion where I'm like, yeah, I'm confident being antinatalist. So that would be my position on consent.
I would still say if you, it just keeps on going back to the principle of uncertainty. So I don't know like how many times you wanted to do that, but I would just say like with consent, if someone already exists and you know that it's likely that they are going to be benefited by an action that you kind of have to take anyway, that's in their better interests, then it's justified to violate their consent. I'm sure there are some caveats there that would need to be said as well. But I would say that just isn't analogous to bringing someone into existence, because you can't really lean on all of these positive things that you could be doing for them. And so it's okay to violate their consent because like they don't want to.
It's not meant to be analogous. It's not meant to be a perfect comparison. It's just meant to draw attention to the fact that there's huge ambiguities with this philosophy and there's huge gray areas for me and other people, I assume, that aren't ready to jump on board, or why they left, you know, because I was antinatalist before. But yeah, so I appreciate it's not exactly the same thing as giving a child a vaccination or something like that. But all it's meant to do is show that having a very clear-cut view on this is not reasonable because you don't know the consequences. Like, you're uncertain. So that is the main refute to, you know, consent. That the argument for the consent argument in antinatalism.
Yeah, again, the only thing I would say is just like if I'm coming to a situation and the action I'm going to take is going to significantly impact someone, which it is, like creating someone is the most significant thing you can do to someone, because it opens up the possibility of anything happening to them, whereas before there was no possibility of that happening. And so if you're coming to a situation where you're going to do the most significant thing you can do to someone, literally for no reason, like you're just choosing to do it, like just one person puts their dick in another person, and then 9 months later, someone is created out of nothing, just because you choose to do it. Like, you're not creating them because they want to be created, you're creating them because you want to create them. I would say if you're uncertain in any way about what is going to happen and what their life is going to be like, I think that uncertainty should lead you not to do anything, because that's just the way I see it. And I think most people would probably agree with that, but it seems that you don't. But I've just provided
I don't, because I don't know what the practical consequences are going to be. That's all. Like, that's all it is. I don't know if they're going to be Martin Luther King. I don't know if they're going to be Hitler. You know, it's like Schrodinger's cat. Like, they're both at nothing at the same time because they haven't been created yet. But yeah, maybe we'll do a separate video on the uncertainty principle. Like, we'll just go away and do more research and see if there is a more accurate one. Okay, so you sort of touched on this a little bit, because I think now we should probably move away from like the theoretical, conceptual like aspects of antinatalism, and you touched a little bit on your view that it's more your view for individuals not to procreate. To me, that I can't separate that from the practical consequences it would have if this actually took off as a philosophy. And from what I've seen, there's arguments on both sides as to show that suffering would either increase or decrease. So I'm still in a position of agnosticism. Like, there's the wild animal suffering argument. So if the population went down, wild animals came back. It's not clear to me that, you know, suffering that wild animals experience, which is great and underestimated and completely unexplored, is worse or better than factory farming. My intuition is factory farming is probably worse, but again, I'm still in an agnostic position. So if the goal of antinatalism is to decrease suffering, it's not clear to me that it actually does that if this was applied. And some people would argue it would create more suffering. So the wild animal suffering argument is like a practical outcome, like a practical concept. It's like a consequentialist kind of take on things. Yeah. I don't buy into it 100%, but again, it's enough for me to get off the antinatalist fence and just sit on the fence.
No, No, I think it's a very valid concern. I think, you know, even if, so even if we remove the theoretical stuff, let's assume for a moment that everyone agrees with antinatalism. And, you know, everyone is in agreement with that we should stop procreating. That doesn't then just like remove the fact that there are going to be practical implications that may be bad, right? Like if the space that we leave, wild animals come into and there's actually more suffering. So I agree with that. I don't think that is an argument against antinatalism. I think it's an argument for being very considered in the way that we implement some sort of policy or take action. So if we are if we in human society choose to even just reduce our population, not like just like not totally procreate at all, even if we just choose to like, let's say half our population, right? So there's loads of land freed up from like the places we lived or the places we grew food on, the wild animals could come back into. It would be up to us to then implement some sort of policy or action so that we try to ensure that that didn't happen if we thought it was going to be a bad thing. And then you get into the realm of like how you could do that. Now, I'm no expert and I've not done any research into this, so I don't necessarily know, but I can give like a few examples that, you know, will probably never happen. But I just like, you know, you know, like examples basically. So, you know, if we have some sort of way to leave an area so that we know that wild animals are likely not to move back into that area, then that would be a way of doing it. So I don't know how you could do that. Maybe you could like, you know, have an area and fill it with concrete and then erect walls around it or something like this. That would probably like very likely reduce the chances of nature taking back. But over time, it probably would again. So I think it's just a tricky situation that we've got to navigate in the future. I don't think it's an argument against, I don't think it's an argument for anyone to procreate. And I don't think it's really an argument against anyone not procreating. I think in reality, it's not like antinatalism is going to be widespread adopted overnight and we're just going to go, like, we're just going to vanish. Like humans are going to be around for probably a long time, and we're going to have, as we become more sort of like ethically conscious as a species, we're going to be doing more and more research into this, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with a way where we can mitigate wild animal suffering, whether we're going to go extinct or not. So that's what I'd say, that concern that you and I have, like I have the same concern. I think that's a reason for doing research and for trying to be you know, conscious about what we're doing rather than an argument against procreation itself.
Yeah, so I just think it's highly aspirational that if antinatalism did even significantly take off, that people would actually have a collective interest in maximizing the well-being of animals in the wild. So I have a practical like objection still to antinatalism being a dominant philosophy or a more dominant philosophy, because I don't think there is any evidence to show that the rights of wild animals or the well-being of wild animals would ever be taken seriously. Maybe I'm being a bit pessimistic, but I think I'm being realistic on this issue. The other main point to bring up is, I think I could confidently say that there is less suffering in cities, like modern cities, than there is in the wild. So if one of the goals is to reduce suffering of sentient beings overall, I think it's called like the ecological niche takeover argument for pronatalists, which I think is quite persuasive. Again, not enough for me to become pronatal, but enough for me to sit on the fence, is that just by virtue of having way less suffering in modern cities and things like healthcare, it's actually desirable to have more cities than it is to have nature. That's going to offend and piss off a lot of hippie vegans out there, but that's just the reality of the situation. And I understand because you know, I have a legal background, I understand policy decisions need to be made for wild animals. I just think it's very aspirational. So like I guess the realistic, like a combination of being realistic and also being a little bit idealistic, is that the human population wouldn't reduce or anything like that. It's just we would get better at managing, you know, the wilderness as it is now. But I think anything that radically changes like the human population or the demographic could have very bad consequences for overall suffering of humans and animals. So again, I'm not coming at it from a pronatal position, but it's enough. The wild animal suffering thing is enough for me to still be on the fence, agnostic on antinatalism.
Would it be enough to make you on the fence? So say if someone came to you and said, would you like to abolish factory farming? Would you make the same argument? Would you say, oh, well, I don't, you know, I will be agnostic on the situation because I don't know whether if we abolish factory farming, all the land it takes up with the actual farms and the cropland to feed the animals, like, you know, if nature came back and there may be more suffering, like it doesn't make the exploitation of animals in factory farms justified, right?
Well, I think factory farming should be abolished, and I think it will be abolished one day, but it'll take time. And, you know, it'll be one farm shuts down here, another farm shuts down there, and then slowly has big vegan businesses blow up and take more of the land. That will eventually see that transition. And I think realistically speaking, we will see a transition from meat and dairy businesses to like a global plant-based food system, not because people are moral, but just because of sustainability issues. So I think it's going to be a gradual transition, but I don't see how that's an argument for antinatalism. That's just an argument for not factory farming.
Yeah, no. I wasn't saying it's an argument for antinatalism. I was saying you were saying that the uncertainty of whether wild animals coming back into land, that will make you agnostic about a situation. I'm saying, why doesn't it make you agnostic about factory farming, like it makes you agnostic about antinatalism?
Well, presumably has vegan businesses and stuff take off, that will also take up some of the land. But yeah, you're right. I think there is a concern that what if factory farming gets abolished and then animals are just like eating each other, being parasites with each other and things like that. So I'm still agnostic on it, you know, like I'm not agnostic on the evilness of factory farming, but in terms of like the procedures that should take place, if somehow we had two large scale comparisons looking at wild animal suffering and looking at factory farming, and for some reason I think it's very unlikely, but it came to light that wild animal suffering was actually way worse. Like, I don't know what my choice would be in terms of, oh, okay, then don't get rid of factory farming. Like, I can't see myself saying that, but that might be a logical conclusion. You know what I mean? But I just don't think like that would ever happen. I don't think, like, my intuition is factory farming is worse, but just by the sheer quantity. But again, we just don't have that data.
I was going to say something and I've forgotten. So if you want to make another point, make it while I try to.
No, I think the ecological niche takeover argument is pretty solid in refuting antinatalism, in my view, just by a simple fact that there's less suffering in human cities. I don't think it's right to go in and like wipe out, you know, wild animals from their habitat, but as it is now, like as in the current situation we're in now, there's less suffering in human cities. There is more suffering in the wild. So I see no reason to try and bring back more nature and less humans by virtue of like the dynamics that we have now.
Yeah. Sorry, on that. So my position anyway, I know other people may disagree. My position is not that we should be bringing back more nature. Like I also agree. I share the view with you that I think nature is like horrible, and like we underestimate as a species how horrible it actually is.
Yeah, but that would definitely happen if we apply antinatalism, like wild animal stuff, like Chernobyl, for example. This is uncontroversial. How do you know that? I've looked at that. That's what happens when human populations go away. Like the wilderness comes back.
But we're talking about but when that's ever happened before, we haven't had the technology that we're going to have in thousands of years. Like we're not talking about humans going extinct now. And my position on antinatalism is like, I'm not trying to control whole populations and stuff like that. When I talk about antinatalism with someone, I'm just asking, what is your justification for bringing someone into existence?
But you can't, I don't think it's reasonable to separate that from how it's going to, how the philosophy, because this is a philosophy you hold for the individual and for society. If you're just holding it for certain people, that doesn't sound like antinatalism to me. That sounds like you're discussing with someone.
I'm not holding it for certain people. I would ask every single person the same question.
Yeah, and if that was applied as a philosophy, even if it took generations, I think that would have dire consequences for like the entire ecosystem. That's what I'm saying.
It may do, but should we not remain agnostic on that?
Well, we should, but what my agnostic entails and what your agnostic entails are two different things because of our disagreement on uncertainty principle.
Yeah, so what my answer would be is that I don't think any individual person is justified in bringing someone into existence, but it's going to happen anyway because we live in the real world and humans are going to be around for probably thousands of years. And whilst we're around, I think we should, and we are already, it's building more and more and it will increase, hopefully. We should be more and more researching into wild animal suffering and how we can help address it. And the examples of humans going away and like civilizations falling and nature reclaiming them before are not comparable to how it's going to be in the future, because in the future we are going to have a vastly different understanding and vastly different technology to be able to deal with the situation. Do I know what that understanding and technology is going to be? No, but I know that we are going to get better and better. And my position on whether people should procreate or not is not going to change that. And me going around and trying to ask people, you know, what is your justification for that, is not going to change that. Like, humans are still going to be around in the real world for thousands of years likely. And so this question about wild animal suffering, I think my position at the moment is, yeah, we don't know what it's going to be like, which is why we should be doing more and more research. I'm not telling anyone not to do research. I think we should be doing more research than we are at the moment. But I don't think that's an argument against antinatalism. Like, with like these sort of practical considerations that we need to make are so far down the line that they aren't really relevant at the moment. Because like if I had like a magic needle to inject people so that they would sterile and couldn't give birth, and I was going around doing that to everyone, then yeah, maybe we would have to consider the practical implications of that for wild animals. But that's not the case. It's such a fringe philosophy that you don't really have to try and refute the theory of it with these practical implications, because the practical implications are irrelevant for thousands of years likely.
I mean,
That was what I would say.
Yeah, I just wouldn't agree that we have to, like, it's reasonable to divorce the practical implications from the theoretical philosophy, because the main reasons people adopt a philosophy is that they think it's going to be productive, or that it's the moral thing to do long term, like I assume for the well-being of other humans. So if you're saying, I have this philosophy for individuals now, but it's not going to take off for like 1,000,000 years or something, but I don't have to deal with like any negative consequences, that doesn't seem like you're fully like committed to that philosophy. If you're making like these exceptions or saying some things are like, it just seems weird.
No, I would say it is. I'd say it's the same with animal rights. You could hold the position that animals should not be exploited and that we should move away from that, but you can hold the position as well at the same time that we shouldn't do it overnight because it may cause more bad than good. And it's the same with antinatalism. It's exactly the same.
But
you can still have a theoretical position and realize that there may be some practical arguments against it, but the practical arguments are not relevant yet. You know,
it's relevant for this discussion because the evidence we have now shows that people don't really give a shit about animals or their suffering in the wild, or are anyway like really committed to maximizing their well-being. And when humans go away, wild animal suffering comes back. So it still has practical implications.
You're applying the views today of wild animals to something practical that's going to happen in thousands of years, probably.
Even like, so, like, why not consider that as part when you're deciding whether this is a legitimate philosophy to hold or not, and the negative consequences that's probably going to happen from it, based on how we understand like humans now. Like when Chernobyl came back, wild animal suffering came back, and like they were probably doing horrible stuff like to each other as well as animals. It's fairly uncontroversial to say that wild animal suffering comes back as human populations disappear. And it's also uncontroversial to say that humans don't really give a moral like shit about animals. And those two together, I think, is an possible argument against antinatalism. Again, not enough for me to be, oh, okay, let's have kids now. But it's enough. Like, I don't think it's valid to just dismiss these as like, oh, it's going to happen in thousands of years. We don't have to worry about it now. The implications are still important to me of what applying antinatalism as a philosophy could do to the ecosystem and human and animal dynamics. But that just might be something we disagree on as what is relevant or not. But to me, it's usually relevant.
I think, I don't know, it comes across to me like you seem to think like that you can't hold a theoretical position if there is some sort of practical implication that you would that would sort of conflict with it. So let me give an example. Like, I think a person can hold the position that killing animals is wrong, like, you know, for whatever reason. But you can live in a world where you know that, you know, some animals are going to be killed, like crop deaths, for example. And I think that still applies with procreation. You can disagree with procreation in and of itself, but also at the same time realize that maybe we do live in a world where humans are going to have to exist to mitigate some things, you know? So it's like, I think you can hold those two positions. Like, you can say that any individual person is not justified in procreating, but, you know, thousands of years down the line, when we get to this position, it may be the case that humans might need to procreate a bit longer so that they can help wild animals in some way. But you can recognize that still the action in and of itself is not justified.
That's not my understanding of antinatalism. Antinatalism to me was creating sentient life is bad, is always going to be bad by virtue of suffering. But you seem to have like nuances and like caveats where in this world it might be okay, if this happened it might be slightly better.
Every philosophy has caveats. Like, look at animal rights, it's got caveats coming out its arse.
Well, that's not antinatalism. Like, if we looked up the definition, I don't think it's in thousands of years where we can manage everything better. That's an argument for a reduction of population and better management. Antinatalism at its core is suffering is always bad, sentience is always bad. I feel like you're not even really antinatalist from this conversation. Like, you're putting arguments for like a reduction of population, a better management of the ecosystem. That's not antinatalism.
No, what I'm saying is that, so with antinatalism, yeah, I agree that no individual person should procreate, but I also recognize that people are going to. That's what I'm saying. When I'm saying about this reduction stuff and management stuff, I'm saying that regardless of my views, people are going to continue procreating. Like, people are doing it now. Maybe that person over there in the house is procreating. I don't know. But like, what I'm saying is, yeah, I have my like image in my head of what I would, you know, like individual people to do. But I can also recognize that in reality, people are going to continue. So it's like, let me give the example with veganism. In my head, I want everyone to stop exploiting animals, but I also realize that people are going to continue doing that. And actually, maybe in the long run, that might be better, because if everyone stopped overnight, it could wreak havoc with stuff like wild animal suffering. And even it could wreak havoc in human society as well. That's all I'm saying. I think.
Okay, just to me, they're two different discussions. We're discussing antinatalism in theory, and then we're discussing how we would manage a world where antinatalism was applied, or what would happen if like 50% of it was applied or something like that. Like, we're no longer discussing the philosophy of antinatalism. We're discussing consequences of applying an antinatalist worldview to certain demographics, which is a different discussion.
Well, I know, but that was what was in your post. That's why we're discussing it. You were talking about wild animal suffering.
Yeah, but to me, that is a legitimate possible argument for pronatalism, because one of the arguments for antinatalism is that human suffering and all this suffering is going to happen. But it is likely that where there are more human cities, there is less suffering, whereas where there's more animal suffering, whereas there's more wilderness, there's more animal suffering. That's all it is.
Yeah, but it's a matter of policy, isn't it? Then you've got to get into policy, which is why we were talking about it.
And I think it is unlikely, if I were to take this line of argument, it is unlikely that we would ever come up with a good, like, it's a fantasy world that we live in, that to think that we're going to have this utopia where, you know, wild animals are completely taken care of. We make sure the tigers don't eat the antelope. We give the tigers manufactured vegan meat or something like that. I would love that. There's a part of my brain that doesn't think that is a legitimate thing to try and strive for, because it is so unrealistic. It's just a potential argument for pronatalism that I would probably, if I was arguing with a pronatalist and they brought that up to me, I would probably accept that as like a possible legitimate argument for pronatalism, just because of my understanding of the way the world functions and how there's much less suffering in human cities than in wilderness, and just human selfishness in general to like properly take seriously the suffering of wild animals.
No, I agree with that. I also don't live in this fantasy world where I think like humans are going to go extinct overnight and then all of the lions are going to walk with the lambs and shit like that. Like, I agree, like, nature is really horrible, and like, you know, I think we should do what we can. Like, maybe from life coming about, you know, a Pandora's box was opened that is never going to be able to have a lid put on it. And given that humans are here and we are the ones that, as far as we're aware, that we're the only ones that have the cognitive capacity to do any of this, we should try our best with the time we have here to, you know, try and alleviate the suffering of wild animals. And I think you can hold that view with, at the same time, holding the view that it is unjustified for any individual person to procreate. I don't see how those two things conflict. It's not like I am, if I held that view and then went round and actually tried to stop people having children forcibly, well, yeah, then it would conflict, because the practical implications of what I was doing would be that wild animals would then end up like suffering immensely, probably. But I'm not doing that. I'm just holding the view that I think people shouldn't individually procreate, but also recognize that they will. And further down the line, you know, maybe the human population will reduce. And I would hope by that point, humans would have become at least ethically conscious enough to go out and altruistically help wild animals in the ways that we can, or will be able to. I don't see how any of that works.
I still think it entails a contradiction, just because with the wild animal suffering thing, that's just a part of reality that is hard to just dismiss. Even as thousands of years down the track, we have no evidence to show that people are ever going to act ethically towards animals. So I don't understand. It's a policy proposal that you're coming up with, but it's not an argument for antinatalism, whereas from the pronatal side, it is an argument for pronatalism, because I think
I wasn't saying it was an argument for antinatalism. I was just saying it's not an argument against it.
But the pronatal argument that there's wild animal suffering and people will not look after wild animals based on the history of humans' relationship with animals, therefore we should just have human cities and maximize human well-being, that is a legitimate argument against antinatalism, because wild animal suffering will come back if human populations die out.
But how does someone know that? We haven't got to the point. Like,
we have lots of examples of human populations dying out and animal suffering come back, Chernobyl being a main one. But that's scientifically controversial to say that wild animal suffering comes back. Like, it's a known scientific fact.
Like I said before, like, those are all examples from like the past, right? And yeah, it can be the very near past, but it's still from the past. And it's like the conversation that we're having now about the human population massively reducing on a global scale, or even just not existing anymore. Like, this is a practical implication that is so far down the line that we should consider now by doing research, which is what I'm saying. We should do research, but I don't think it's some sort of like slam dunk you can pull out your pocket now, because it has no relevance to the procreation of like Jim in Spain, you know?
It would on a collective level, not on an individual level. But if we're talking about antinatalism on a broad level, like applying this philosophy that you want people to adopt, eventually it will have this effect of lesser populations and more wild animal suffering. Like, I don't really understand how you're divorcing the two. And I know you're saying, oh, different technology, and it'll we can come up with, you know, better worlds and all this, but there's no evidence to show that that's actually going to happen. That's how humans are going to do it. So it's still that parallel argument thing. Like, I make this parallel argument, or you say, oh, but this could happen, we should do this. It's still not an argument for antinatalism.
Yeah, no, I understand this, and I understand that we don't, like, I'm not totally divorcing the two. I'm just saying that you can hold both positions at the same time, I think. And also, yeah, there's no evidence that, you know, if humans continue to exist further down the line, that we're going to help wild animals. But there's also no evidence that, like, we're going to, like, further down the line, like, it could be that further down the line we become very altruistic, or it could be further down the line we just go out and like purge everything and burn everything. Like, we don't know, right? And so
exactly, it's parallel argument. So I don't know why it's an antinatalist argument.
No, but what I'm saying is I'm not concerning myself really with what is going to happen in 1,000 years' time, because I don't know what's going to happen in 1,000 years' time. What I'm saying is I know what is happening now, and what I'm saying is I'm not justified in procreating. I don't think others are justified in procreating, but people are procreating. And given that, we should be preparing for what is happening, what is going to happen in 1,000 years.
Okay, we're just going to get back to the uncertainty principle. We're just going to get back to, you think sentience, bringing sentience in is completely unjustified. And I think it's so abstract and we can't make that decision objectively. Like, it's just going to keep coming back to that argument, even with this wild animal suffering thing. So I don't know how to reconcile those two things, because yeah. All right, so the third point was, oh, actually that was the third point, but the second point was time constant, which I said, so the majority of the world's problems produced will take more than one generation to fix, and most of them will involve development of new technology, which doesn't come with more money and more time. So I guess there's evidence to show that, you know, the world is developing with technology, and technology will probably be a solution to a lot of our problems, including possibly, hopefully, moving to a plant-based global food system. And when you, I guess, advocate or try and put an argument for an anti-natalist philosophy that could potentially cull a lot of brilliant minds, it's not like you get to pick and choose, or just the smart ones, just the, you know what I mean? Keep this, like, don't breed stupid people only, because that wouldn't be anti-natalism. So the argument for that is that if this philosophy actually worked on any level, you'd be culling a lot of people out that would potentially.
What do you mean culling? No one's asking to cull anyone.
But that would be, this is where I think we disagree on, like, the practical consequences of antinatalism, because people actually started adopting.
The concept of antinatalism is going around culling people?
No, but that's what would happen, because not culling people, but it would result in the culling of a population, because less and less people would breed. And with that, you're also compromising, like, smart minds and people to.
Culling differently, because culling, at least in the UK, means actively going around and killing.
No, that's not what I meant. I just meant it would result in less people being born, and with that comes, you know, less people who produce ideas, and less people with talent and things like that, because you don't get to pick and choose as an
anti-natalist. Less people to suffer from the issues that you care about. Sorry,
what's that?
Less people to suffer from the issues that you're trying to address in the first place. It seems kind of nonsensical to me to say that there are issues that, like, there are issues that exist because people exist, and therefore to solve those issues, we should do the very thing that's causing them. Whereas what seems more sensible to me is, say if you're someone who is concerned with an issue, let's say FGM, for example, female genital mutilation. What I would say is it literally makes no sense at all to bring a new person into existence. I don't see how those two things are linked. What would make sense is to campaign against that issue yourself. And if you want to continue that after you die, you should adopt someone and then, you know, help educate and train in some way.
You could say that, but you could just say the pronatal position, where this FGM, I can say confidently, is not going to be fixed in the next generation. So we still need more people to advocate for that. So you still have that parallel argument to deal with if you're trying to argue anti-natalism. Like, oh, less people and then less men hurting women, but then you could have more people and more people speaking out for women and ending it with. Sorry, what's that?
Well, it's not just men that do FGM, like.
Yeah, well, I mean, anything, you know. So it's still, with every anti-natalist argument, there's just this parallel argument just sitting there staring at me, where I can't.
So what is the parallel argument here?
Okay, so the one you gave about female genital mutilation is that we shouldn't breed more people, we should campaign against it. And the parallel argument would be it's going to take more people to actually campaign against that, because that's a generational issue. That's not something that's going to stop within the next 10 or 20 years. You don't have to
breed someone into existence to get someone on board into an issue.
We need more people. If people stopped breeding, then we would have less people campaigning for it as well. So that would be the parallel argument.
Yeah, but if people stopped breeding, there would be no one in existence to suffer from FGM.
Oh, it could be they just get down to a very small population where it's only evil people performing FGM.
Well, yeah, but then let's say everyone stops existing and there's only like 50 people left in the universe, and like 2 of them are suffering from FGM. The 50 people can sort it out. Like, why do they have to breed new people into it? If no one's breeding, then the people who are campaigning against FGM will likely die at the same time as the people getting FGM. So then there will be no problem.
Or the people could solve the problem and they could build a new world, like a new utopia without FGM. Like, for everything that you say for anti-natalism, could be the same thing could be said for pro-natalism. Someone could just invent a magic unicorn and solve all their problems.
Well, I don't
like, it's a parallel argument.
I don't think it is a parallel argument. I don't see where, like, breeding someone into existence helps the cause of FGM. Like, if you think about animal rights, how many people in the animal rights movement are in it because they were born into a family that supported animal rights? Probably 1% or less than that. You know, I wasn't. My family are complete carnists.
No, but you're affected by environment and other people and all
Yeah,
these different
exactly. I'm
things.
affected by environment. The main way that ideas spread is not through being born. It's through education and interacting with other people who already exist.
Yeah, and the parallel argument there would be that we would always need more people to educate like the next generation of people on how to live ethically on all these different issues. And then if you start saying, or if you start applying the anti-natalist philosophy, those minds that could have existed and helped other people, they no longer exist. And then what if we get to a stage where the community is so small, and then not community, like if we get to a stage where anti-natalism is applied, it could slow a lot of things down in terms of like technology advancements and in terms of accelerating movements like animal rights that are going to take more than one generation to get off the ground, because you're I can't say the word culling now, but you're reducing the amount of people being born into the earth and to solve those problems. And yeah, I understand what you're saying. Oh, but by reducing it, you're making less problems and less suffering. But there's still that other parallel argument where, oh no, but this person could come into the world and, you know, be the next like great educator or like contribute significantly to the world. It doesn't put me in a competent.
Come into the world and be the next Adolf Hitler. You know, they could come into.
And
the
there
world
could be Martin Luther King. It's a parallel argument. That's what I'm saying.
But it's not a parallel argument. What I'm saying is, given you don't know what they're going to be, which is taking both positions, then you should not act. Like, you don't know who they're going to be. And so if you feel like you can create the conditions where you're going to bring the new Martin Luther King into the world, well, adopt someone and put them in those conditions, you know, or adopt multiple children and put them in those conditions. If you feel like you're some messiah who can, you know, create these geniuses, then go out, adopt people, set up a school, something like this. I don't understand why it compels someone to.
Okay, adoption is like a completely separate issue, and I think there's actually legitimate objections, which I've heard from some people not against adoption, but they argue that it doesn't actually make much of a difference in terms of this thing. I don't know those arguments inside out, so I'm not going to get into it here. But the point is, your kid could be Hitler, your kid could be Martin Luther King. The principle of uncertainty, to me, it just means you're just uncertain, you're agnostic, none of your actions reflect what you haven't cast a moral judgment. So you're not required to be bound to earn any action or inaction because you haven't made a moral judgment yet. Or else you are already saying, even though we're agnostic, I'm making this moral judgment of don't bring another being into the world. That's the difference. I don't think that's a principle of uncertainty.
If you could press a button and it would either create a factory farm, or it would create a facility where people are on these machines where they're just experiencing intense orgasms the whole time, do you think you should not press the button? Because I would say you should not press the button, even if you're uncertain on which one's going to happen.
That's an example where we have two worlds where we are completely across what is happening in both worlds. That's not the situation with anti-natalism. It is far more nuanced. It is so much. There's a lot of distinctions. There's a lot of difference in qualities of life and things like that. You're giving me an option that's like completely.
You were making that argument. You were saying like, oh well, they could be Martin Luther King or they could be Adolf Hitler. So,
but I'm not agnostic. I'm not agnostic in that scenario that you just showed me, and that's not comparable to the situation of anti-natalism. I wouldn't be agnostic in that. I would choose the world with orgasms. I wouldn't choose the world with suffering.
No. I'm saying, would you press the button if you don't know which one is going to happen? Because obviously I would choose Martin Luther King over Hitler.
But that's not the options for the average kid or for anyone. It's not you're going into a factory farm or you're going to heaven.
The options for the average kid aren't to be Martin Luther King or Adolf Hitler either. But that was the example you used. So I'm giving you another example, which is removing the any sort of emotional attachment to human procreation and just turning it into a button.
Yeah, but it's still not comparable to bringing a kid into the world, choosing a factory farm or choosing orgasms. Those aren't the options on the table for people coming into the world. They're not going into slavery, and if they are, I would say don't breed, but that's not an argument for antinatalism. Antinatalism is sentient life should always be not had.
No, antinatalism is that one person should not create sentient life. If someone is alive and sentient already, it's up to them what they do. I don't think
that's not the same thing as that's not the same thing as being agnostic on factory farming or like choosing a button between factory farming and what's the other one, like heaven, basically.
Okay, well, remove factory farming. Let's say, you know, you have two people. One is having a really, really shit life. One is having a really, really good life. And you have a button. You can press it. One of them is created. Should you press the button? I would say no, given that
And
neither
you
of
don't
them,
know which one you're going to get.
you have no idea which
These
one.
are polarized examples that don't reflect the reality of giving birth, like bringing someone into the world. Like, I don't think they're fair comparisons.
You were the one who brought them up in the first place. I didn't mention Hitler and Martin Luther King. You did.
Yeah, to illustrate that it could be like, okay, maybe those
And
are.
I'm using this to illustrate something.
I'm just saying that if you're saying don't breed, don't bring people into existence because it's going to cause more problems, there's that parallel argument of bringing people into the world could also help solve problems. That's all it is. That's all the parallel argument is. And it leads.
I wasn't saying that bringing people into existence necessarily will cause more problems. You know, bringing Nelson Mandela into existence or bringing Martin Luther King into existence probably didn't cause more problems. It probably benefited a lot of people. What I'm saying is that doesn't justify the initial act of procreation. You know, if someone is wrongfully imprisoned for some reason, but they actually end up, you know, having a very enjoyable time in this prison, they learn a lot, they grow as a person, they even benefit the other inmates. Like, the outcome of that is actually that it's, you know, it's been relatively beneficial. Does it justify the initial imprisonment? No, I would say no. It doesn't justify the initial imprisonment. It's just really lucky and, you know, good that that reckless thing that was initially done led to something that was.
Well, that's a specific ad hoc example of where if you gave me that case, I could come to a conclusion based on that person's life. But it still doesn't put me into a place where I would think always that it is wrong to bring sentient life into the world. It's just a fundamental disagreement. I don't know what else to say about it. But we've been talking for a little while. I think we've covered most of what we wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
unless you wanted to get into anything else with me.
Were there any other points on the actual slide?
No, those were my 3 points: the uncertainty principle, time constant, wild animal suffering. And then I said there are good reasons for not having kids depending on your personality and desires, ability to provide kids with net positive life, and people feeding their children products of animal abuse definitely shouldn't be raising humans. However, all of this is not an argument for AN. So I think there are reasons for people not to have kids. I never ever want kids. Like, that would just, I would rather contract a fatal disease.
Yeah, I would just, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I think there are legitimate reasons for certain types of people not having kids, but I don't hold there is a legitimate argument, like a structurally sound argument that I can say with confidence, like intellectually and everything else, for antinatalism. And you obviously
the only thing that I would say, just to round off for anyone listening, is I would just repeat the point that I was making earlier, that I think the principle of uncertainty, if you're uncertain about the implications of what you're doing and you don't have to take any action, I would say you should err on the side of caution. But I think Pat and I disagree on that. But I just wanted to repeat that that's my position. So I think, yeah, if you don't know what's going to happen to the person you're creating, then you should err on the side of caution. The other thing I would say is that if anyone is watching and they are going to, you know, have a biological child or something like that, I just hope that you're, you know, very responsible and you know, give them the best life that you can. I think it's a very reckless thing to do, but if you're going to be reckless, then I hope it works out well for the kid.
Look, I might support things like baby licenses. I may support things like making it quite difficult for a family to raise a child. We might agree on some of those things. You know, I don't think anyone should be able to have a child anywhere. I don't always think bringing kids into the world is a good thing. I don't want any myself. I've seen people and just gone like, why the fuck did you breed? So there's probably outside the philosophical tendencies of antinatalism, we would probably agree on a lot of things related to that philosophy, not that specific philosophy, due to the disagreement, mostly on the uncertainty principle. I think, because I can't understand how not taking an action for a moral reason is not taking a side. So I really want to see people discuss that, if you know they have any further insights.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do like, we can do another general discussion with more people. Like, if we can get like a couple more other people on and have a conversation on that exact topic.
I know people that would love to debate this stuff. Like,
I also think I agree with you. I think we would have a lot of common ground in actual policy that could be pursued, because whilst, you know, whilst I have this view in my head, you know, I'm not some sort of like crazed person that thinks that we should just go and ban procreation tomorrow. Like, I understand that despite having a certain philosophical view, you can understand that actually in reality, when you come to implement policies, it's going to be more beneficial to do certain things. So for example, like, I would prefer to implement policies like helping economic development, or helping increasing access to water, or access to contraception, or access to education, like all of these things that would have the practical implication of less people being born, because they generally reduce birth rates. I would do that rather than just banning procreation, because it's like, banning procreation would be fucking stupid. Like, it wouldn't work anyway, and you know, it would
there's like lots of policy kind of debates around it as well. And
exactly, so I that's another thing that people should appreciate as well, is that even if they do see the philosophy as very hardline, it's not the case that people just want to go around and fucking cut people's dicks off or something, you know. It's like,
oh, I wasn't like that when I was antinatalist, so and most of my friends who were antinatalists were like that. That was a good discussion. I'm glad we got to chat about it. I actually know quite a few people that would love to keep discussing this, like even more than me, and I'm relatively new like to the antinatalist philosophy and the arguments against it and the arguments for agnosticism. So yeah, if I told them about it, maybe you could discuss with them as well, because they're more pronatal than I am. Like, I'm just sitting on the fence. Sometimes I'm a little bit pronatal, but some people, are really more on the pronatal side of things. So it'd probably make for a more interesting discussion rather than me just being like, I don't know, like, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced, you know what I mean? Like, they probably have, more direct kind of arguments for pronatalism.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I want to get into like a whole series of like different, like just
Maybe you should.
Round of different people, but like, yeah, I'd be happy to like talk to people and stuff. And...
Faster, stronger. That don't kill me.